I recently ordered a 1500 watt fiber laser from SkyFire, and in doing so, I needed to get several things. I needed to get the laser source, I needed to get the head, I needed to get all the control components, but I also needed to get a 1500 watt laser chiller. And for that, I chose the TU or TEYU or SNA CWFL 1500. But one of the conditions was that they had to ship it via air without refrigerant, which is R410A. And that wasn't a big deal. I had the equipment to be able to do it. You need a scale and a vacuum pump, and of course the tank of R410A, which you can buy online. I got mine from icecold.us. It was a really good website. They shipped out fast, and I would definitely use them again. The other items that aren't necessary but would be nice to have would be a vacuum gauge to show you how much vacuum you're getting from your vacuum pump, and also a manifold gauge, which allows you to see the pressures inside the unit. And I really, in this case, just used it as a sensitive valve so I could let the refrigerant out slowly rather than using just the valve on the R410A tank. And if you don't get the manifold gauge, you still need to get the hoses. So I would just recommend getting a cheap manifold gauge on Amazon because it comes with brand new hoses you can use to connect everything. And before we get into the actual process, I will say you need to be EPA certified to do any of this. You don't actually need to be EPA certified to buy the R410A, although a lot of people will tell you you will. You don't need to be, but I recommend at least reviewing the information, even if you don't get the certification, because that way you'll have some idea what you're getting into here. Because there are some dangerous parts to it. The R410A can be really cold when it comes out, and you can easily freeze your hand off. So definitely wear gloves, eye protection, and anything that would make you feel safer when you're handling this stuff. And realistically, it's not that complicated of a process, but if you have any hesitations or you're not sure about how to do any of this, just hire a professional. It's a lot easier than wasting a lot of time and money and possibly getting hurt. So that's the disclaimer. And now I think we're ready to fill up the CWFL 1500. So first of all, we'll look at the backplate name tag on the back of the chiller itself. I highly recommend using this rather than a manual or some other source on the internet. And I'll tell you why. It's because from what I've noticed, there are a lot of discrepancies between manuals and other information on the internet, but the actual information, the amount of charge of R410A that the unit will hold is always going to be on the nameplate, and it will be very specific to the model you have. And it is very important to only put in the amount of refrigerant that's listed on this backplate. And if you do any more or less, it could easily damage your unit. This one in particular uses 470 grams, which translates to 0.47 kilograms, and that is equal to approximately 1.03 pounds, or 1 pound, 0.48 ounces, which is the measurement that I ended up using. So here I'm showing the vacuum gauge connected to the manifold gauge connected to the vacuum pump. That's just a Harbor Freight 2.5 CFM vacuum pump. Right now it's sucking all the moisture and air and anything that was in the lines right out. And I'm gonna try to get a vacuum under 300. I think I get it quite a bit under that, like 250, which is really good. And it's such a small unit. There's no long line set like in air conditioners or anything, so it goes pretty fast. There you just saw me cut the vacuum pump off at the manifold gauge. I just turned the valve and closed it off. So the vacuum remains, but the vacuum pump is basically disconnected. And then you actually disconnect the yellow hose from the vacuum pump, and we'll take that same hose and put it on the R410A tank here. I usually just do it very tight with my fingers. I usually don't need a wrench or anything like that, but it does need to be pretty tight. Here I'm turning the valve on the 410 tank itself, which goes into the manifold gauge where it can be regulated there. Now I have the tank upside down on the scale set to 0. I'm adjusting the manifold gauge to get the perfect amount of liquid and gas R410A into the chiller itself. I've removed the vacuum gauge from the chiller, and I have the blue line from the manifold gauge going directly into where the vacuum gauge was on the chiller itself. Back to the part where I was talking about the liquid and gas. When you have the tank upside down, it's really putting out more liquid because all the liquid goes down to the bottom where the valve is, and it's coming out as liquid for the most part. You don't really want that liquid going directly into the chiller. You want to limit the flow with the valve on the manifold gauge so it has a chance to turn into gas before it enters the chiller. You can probably see on the scale here that I got 1 pound, 0.8 ounces. It's a little bit over what I was going for, but that's because a lot of the liquid that came out of the tank actually ended up inside the gauge, where you can see it with the gauge sight, and that needed some time to convert to gas before it entered into the chiller. And using the weigh-in method like we're doing here, it's pretty accurate. It doesn't have to be 100% spot on. You can be, 0.2, 0.3 ounces over, and it doesn't affect performance too much. It's only when you start getting into 2 ounces or more than that that you might actually notice a huge difference. But it is important to get it within a few, I'd say at least half an ounce, to nail that. It's an imperfect science using this method for sure, because you're just going on weight, and there's gas left in the manifold gauge. But if you can get it pretty close, you should be fine. Just a couple of notes before we conclude the video. When I connected the blue line to the input valve on the chiller, I used the Schrader end of the hose. That is the end that has a little metal piece in the middle that pushes in on the Schrader valve on the chiller, and that just acts as an on-off switch, an on-off valve. So you do need to have that on there on that end. One other thing to note, when you are letting the gas out from the manifold gauge into the chiller, loosen up the blue hose end that's connected to the chiller. Loosen that up a little bit so it's not completely pressing in on the Schrader valve, and let a little bit of gas out, and then tighten it up once you get just half a second of gas out. That will prevent any air from getting into the chiller's lines, and the air is definitely something you don't want in there. If you followed all the steps and you did everything right, you should be good to go now. I hope this helped some of you that might have some idea of what you were doing but needed a little extra step-by-step to help you along the way. And if you do, leave a comment below. Tell me about your process. Maybe tell me about your SkyFire experience. I'm kind of curious about that. Apparently a lot of people didn't have to do this before, but I don't know if it was some sort of regulation or due to customs. They are doing it now, where they ship it without refrigerant. And that's exactly why I created this video. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.